All right, so imagine like a secret mission, but it's not happening in some dark alley or anything. It's happening right above us in the sky.
Okay.
We're talking about a massive amount of stuff being moved, and it has to happen fast. But it's not gold or diamonds or anything like that. It's millions of iPhones.
Wow, millions of iPhones like being flown from one place to another.
Yep, from one continent to a whole other one.
That's crazy. It does sound a little bit like something out of a movie or something.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's really happening, and it's all because of like global economics, the stuff that affects, all the gadgets we use every single day.
Exactly. This isn't made up. This is a real thing that just happened. Apple, the big tech company, they basically pulled off what some people are calling the Great iPhone Airlift. They moved about 600 tons of their iPhones, that's like 1.5 million phones, straight from factories in India to the US.
Wow. Okay, so why India to the U.S.? What's going on there?
Tariffs, that's the big reason, those taxes that get slapped on stuff brought in from other countries, well, they were going way up. And
So,
that's what kicked off this whole massive operation. You've probably seen the headlines about trade wars and stuff, but today we're going to really break down how that actually trickles down and affects the tech we use, like the phones in our pockets and the crazy things companies like Apple have to do to keep up. Oh, and by the way, we're basing all this on reports that lay out this whole airlift thing and the economic stuff that led up to it.
right. And in this deep dive, we really want to understand like the whole why and how of this airlift. How do they pull it off? How big was it really? And what does it all tell us about how international trade and manufacturing work these days, in the 21st century?
Exactly. This isn't just about getting stuff from point A to point B. It's a look at how the big players in the global market adapt, or even scramble sometimes, when the economic ground starts to shift beneath their feet.
It's a good way to put it. And, you mentioned tariffs. That's a good place to start, I think.
Absolutely. Specifically, the tariffs that the Trump administration placed on goods coming in from China. By Wednesday, April 9th, 2025, they had climbed to a whopping 125%.
125%. That's huge. That's more than double the price, right?
Yeah.
And for a company like Apple, who makes most of their iPhones in China, that kind of increase is a massive problem. Like it totally changes the game for them.
Exactly. And to give you an idea of how that could hit your wallet, let's say you're thinking of getting a top-of-the-line iPhone, the 16 Pro Max. Usually that goes for about $15,599.
Right.
But factor in a 125% tariff on top of that. Analysts at Rosenblatt Securities crunched the numbers, and they said that could bump the price up to something like $2,300, maybe even as high as $2,600 in a worst-case scenario.
Wow, that's a big jump for just one phone.
Yeah.
Like for a lot of people, that would make it too expensive. That's not an impulse buy anymore.
Exactly. And for Apple, a company that sells a ton of iPhones worldwide, they can't just eat that kind of cost increase without hurting their profits, maybe even losing some customers who can no longer afford their products. So they had to find another way. They had to figure out how to make their iPhones somewhere else, basically to avoid those massive tariffs.
Makes sense. So where do they go?
India. India's become like a big manufacturing hub for a lot of tech companies, including Apple. And the good thing for them is the tariff on electronics imported from India to the US, it was way lower, like 26%.
26% versus 125%. Yeah, it's a big difference.
It is, right. Now, to be fair, 26% still isn't nothing, but compared to the 125% from China, it's a much better deal.
Absolutely.
It's a huge saving, a way for Apple to keep their iPhones, at a reasonable price in the US, which is a super important market for them.
It's all about being competitive in the end.
Exactly. And that difference in tariff is what really drove this whole Operation Airlift thing. Apple was staring down the barrel of this massive tariff increase, so they had to find a way to get a ton of iPhones into the US quickly and avoid that 125% hit.
I see. So that brings us to the airlift itself.
Mm.
And we're not talking about a few boxes on a plane here.
Nope, not at all. Apple chartered 6 cargo jets, massive planes, each one loaded up with about 100 tons of iPhones.
100 tons. That's incredible.
That adds up to the 600 tons we talked about 1.5 million iPhones flying across the world.
It boggles the mind, like the logistics of it all, Getting 6 huge planes, loading them up, keeping those iPhones secure, it's mind-blowing. And it really shows just how much pressure Apple was under to dodge those tariffs.
Oh, yeah, this wasn't just a regular delivery. It was a strategic move, a big one. And the timing was super important, too. Reports say that at least one of those planes took off from India only a few hours before the tariff hike on Chinese goods kicked in. Talk about cutting it close.
Down to the wire. Wow. So they're literally racing against the clock to get these phones into the U.S., before that 125% tariff goes live.
Exactly. They had to get those India-made iPhones on U.S. soil before that higher tariff could even potentially be applied. It was like a race against time.
I can just picture it, those planes in the air, millions of dollars worth of iPhones on board. It's like something out of a movie.
I know, right? To give you an idea of how much stuff we're talking about, a single iPhone 14 with its packaging weighs about 350 grams. That's a little over 12 ounces.
Okay.
Now multiply that by 1.5 million.
Right.
It's a huge amount of weight, tons and tons of iPhones being moved across the globe.
And that's not just about avoiding tariffs on those particular phones.
Right.
It's about getting a stockpile of India-made iPhones into the U.S. right before those higher tariffs mess things up in the market.
Exactly. Now, anytime you move that much stuff across borders, you got to deal with customs. And that's where things get even more interesting. So at Chennai Airport in India, where these phones were being shipped from, getting through customs usually takes about 30 hours.
30 hours, it's a long time, especially when you're trying to beat a deadline like this.
It is. And think about it. Electronics, their prices change all the time.
Yeah.
A 30-hour delay could have messed up the whole plan, made the whole thing pointless, even with the lower tariff from India.
So they had to get creative.
They did. Apple got that customs time down to 6 hours.
6 hours. That's amazing. How'd they manage that?
They worked closely with the airport and customs officials in India, basically created this super fast process.
Like a VIP lane for iPhones.
Basically, they call it a green corridor, and it's a system for getting things through customs really quickly. Apple's use similar things at some airports in China because, in their business, speed is key.
Speed and efficiency, especially when you're dealing with tariffs and deadlines.
Totally. And it wasn't just the airport. The Indian government, even Prime Minister Modi's administration, helped make this happen. It took them 8 months of planning to set up this speedy customs process.
Wow, so they were really serious about this. 8 months of planning? That shows you how important this airlift was to Apple.
Oh, yeah. This was a big deal for them. Now, while all this was happening, back at the Foxconn factory in Chennai where these iPhones are made, things were getting pretty hectic.
Hectic, how?
They had to ramp up production like crazy to meet the demand for this massive airlift. Remember, they had to get a lot of phones ready in a short amount of time.
Right.
So Foxconn, they're one of Apple's main manufacturers in India. They started having their employees work on Sundays.
Really?
Usually they only work Monday to Saturday, but to get those extra iPhones made, they had to add an extra day. It bumped up their production by 20%. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
It shows how flexible they had to be to get this done.
Absolutely. And that factory in Chennai is a big deal for Apple. Last year, they made something like 20 million iPhones there.
20 million, wow.
Yeah, and not just older models. We're talking the latest iPhone 15s and even some 16s.
So it's not just like a backup factory. It's a major part of their production.
It is, and it's not just Foxconn either. Apple also works with Tata in India, and they're expanding too, building more factories.
Interesting.
This tells you that Apple's serious about making India a central part of their manufacturing plans. It's not just a temporary thing because of the tariffs. It's part of a bigger strategy.
I see. So it's a win-win for both Apple and India, I guess.
Exactly. And all this activity, the planes, the factories, it's had a big impact on global trade. In January and February of this year, 2025, iPhone shipments from India to the U.S. went through the roof. They're worth $770 million in January and $643 million in February.
Okay, those are big numbers, but how do they compare to, like, before the airlift?
Well, in the 4 months before that, from September to December of 2024, those shipments were only worth between $110 million and $331 million.
Wow, so it more than doubled.
More than doubled, yeah. So it's pretty clear that Apple's move to make more iPhones in India is directly tied to those tariffs.
Makes sense.
And where were all those phones going in the U.S.? Mostly to big cities.
Yeah.
Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco.
Usual suspects.
Yep. Those are the main hubs for getting stuff into the country and then distribute it to the rest of the U.S.
Right. Makes sense. But back to the bigger picture for a second. Why go through all this trouble? Why this massive, complicated airlift?
Well, the U.S. market is huge for Apple. They sell a ton of iPhones all over the world, over 220 million each year, and a big chunk of those sales are in the U.S.
Yeah.
They can't afford to have their iPhones become too expensive in the U.S. It would really hurt their business.
It's their bread and butter. Got to keep those sales up. And those tariffs, they were a big threat to that.
Absolutely, and the numbers back that up. Counterpoint Research, they say that about 1/5 of all iPhones sold in the U.S. now come from India.
1/5? That's a lot. And it wasn't that high before, was it?
Nope. So it's clear that Apple is putting a lot of faith in India as a way to deal with these tariffs and stay competitive.
So it's not just about tariffs then, is it?
Not really. This whole airlift is part of a bigger strategy for Apple. They're trying to not be so reliant on China for making their products.
Yeah, I can see why they'd want to do that with all the trade tension and stuff.
Exactly. And India is becoming a key part of that plan. They're investing in India, building new factories, expanding their operations. It's a long-term move.
Like spreading the risk, right? Not putting all your eggs in one basket. It's pretty smart.
It is, and it shows how companies like Apple have to adapt to all the changes happening in the world, the politics, the economics. They can't just sit still. They have to be ready to shake things up when they need to, and this airlift is a perfect example of that.
It's like they're playing chess on a global scale.
They are. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It really makes you think, you know?
It does.
All these iPhones flying across the world just to avoid attacks? It's a little crazy when you think about it.
It is kind of absurd, but it also shows how connected the world is now and all the work that goes into making the stuff we use every day.
Absolutely. All the people involved, the factory workers in India putting in extra hours, the people coordinating all the logistics. It's a huge effort.
It is pretty amazing. So where do things stand now? Well, as of today, April 10th, 2025, things have calmed down a bit. The U.S. put a 90-day pause on any more tariff increases for most countries, except China, of course.
So that gives Apple a little breathing room, but the problem hasn't gone away, has it?
Nope, that 125% tariff on stuff from China is still in place, so what happens next is anyone's guess. Will Apple keep making more iPhones in India? Will iPhone prices go up?
Right, right. Will Apple end up paying for those tariffs themselves to keep prices down?
Exactly. And could India eventually become Apple's main manufacturing hub, taking over from China?
Those are all big questions. No one knows for sure what'll happen.
Nope, we'll just have to wait and see. But one thing's for sure, Apple is willing to go to great lengths to keep their business running smoothly. They're not afraid to make bold moves.
And it makes you wonder, if they're doing all this for iPhones, what about other products we use? What kind of crazy stuff is happening behind the scenes to get us our clothes, our food, our electronics, you know?
Exactly. It makes you think about all the things we take for granted, all the complex systems that bring us the things we buy.
Totally. It's a whole world we don't usually see.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Until next time, keep asking questions and digging deeper into the world around you.
And who knows what we'll uncover next.
Exactly. There's always more to discover.